Director of Captain Phillips, Mr. Paul Greengrass. Hello, Paul.
Thank you very much.
How's it going, sir?
It's very good.
Good. So, Paul, it's been a couple of years since Green Zone for you, and in that time you were flirting with, you were attached to a number of different projects, but obviously you ultimately plumbed for Captain Phillips. What was it about this one in particular that stood out for you?
Well, it was three things really. I thought it was a great story and a great, world and clear characters, and I didn't know the story, so that was a help really, because when I read it, it sort of had a real sort of excitement about it. I loved the idea of making a sort of proper pirate movie that wasn't a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean type pirate movie, but was about the real world of, it's a sort of brutal, dirty old game. It's international organised crime, really. But it's in Somalia, so, there's all those issues. And chance to work with Tom, I thought that was a big, we knew each other a bit, but had never found something to do, so that was good. And also my dad was in the Merchant Navy, in the Merchant Marine, as they call it in America. He was at sea all his life, so I wanted to make a film about that world. So all those three things sort of made it an easy decision.
So was that, in terms of wanting to make a film about piracy and the real world piracy, was that an itch you had to scratch, or in the same way that you had an itch with United 93 that you wanted to scratch, and with Green Zone with the Iraq War, ultimately? Or was it just something that came up?
No, I was aware of it.
Yeah.
It was on the. It's a very interesting subject because it really goes to the heart of, the haves and the have-nots, and a divided world and fast globalizing economy. All of which traverses the sea lanes. So that always sort of made it compelling. And I loved the two characters at the heart of it, the two captains from different worlds. So it was really quite an easy decision, to be honest. It was sort of one of those where you go, yeah, I'm in for that.
And how much did you mould the script when you came on board? How much did it change?
Quite a bit. The first draft, Billy's draft, sort of was like Phillips'
Billy Ray,
book.
yeah.
It followed the story of Phillips, his first-person account, and then his wife's experiences at home. And that I wanted to make a sort of film on the ocean. So we did a lot of research basically to find out much more about Musi and the four pirates and the whole sort of military response thing, and then we did more drafts to make it where I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm. And there's a great care as well given to the pirate story as well, in terms of putting their story in context, making sure they're not necessarily demonized or made the villains of the piece.
Yep.
Can you talk about that process as well?
Well, they are the villains of the piece.
Yeah.
I don't think you can get away
but
from
not
that.
Sort of,
the point is, it's what was interesting about it was that it was a crime story, and not a story about terrorism or any of those things. They all felt very much sort of to do with the post 9/11 world. This felt to me much more contemporary, and the best crime stories do two things. They deal with the crime and its consequences, so there's a sort of moral clarity to it. And you can see that in literature. Crime and punishment. That's the classic Dostoevsky crime story. Or more modern, you'd go non-fiction. It would be In Cold Blood. But it's always the sort of narrative, dramatic clarity of crime and its consequences, because you have the clarity of the criminal and the victim always at the heart, and the consequences for both. But you also, in great crime stories, have, along with that clarity, the ambiguity and the moral ambiguity of the crime and its relationship to the society that gives rise to the crime. So you get both, and that's what you get here. You're aware that these young men are, engaged in the kidnap and piracy business, which is a brutal business, but they come from a world where there are very, very few choices, and that sort of stark division creates all sorts of layers in the story that I like.
And what sort of research did you do into that world, and how did you gain insight into that world?
Well, we went to see a lot of people who knew all about it, watched lots of stuff. There's a brilliant academic study which was basically just a whole series of interviews with young pirates in prison, basically, but in Mogadishu and in Kenya. That was very interesting because it was like meeting 50 pirates, basically. I did think about going to Somali, but the problem was we were committed to filming dates, and I couldn't get insurance. They would have had to cancel the film if I went. So, but I met quite a few people who knew Muse and the other three guys. I tried to meet him in prison, but couldn't for various legal reasons. But it was interesting.
Absolutely. And you're obviously known for your meticulous research, and authenticity is a huge thing for you. And watching this movie, the storming the ship sequences, how true to real life were they? Are they actually recreations?
That's exactly how they do it. That's exactly how they do it. And there's fantastic stuff. I mean, even if you just go online and look at pirate attacks, you see absolutely staggering kind of attack. They come in those skiffs, and believe me, it's incredibly dangerous what they do, because going alongside a container ship that's moving at speed is incredibly dangerous, because the undertow from a thing that a volume is incredible, and they get the ladder up. I mean, it's unbelievable, really.
We actually have the first clip from the movie is of the first moment that Captain Phillips and the crew of the Maersk Alabama spot the two skiffs. So let's take a look at that. They certainly are not large fish. In terms of filming that, how did you go about doing that?
Well, we shot off Malta, and it took a lot of planning. The problem when you shoot on sea is you can't really supply your unit, and also to reset anything with skiffs, even more so with a large vessel, it just takes forever because everything's moving. You know what I mean? So you can't tell everybody stop and then reverse and come back to a start line. You've got to create start lines that might be miles ahead and get everybody to come to so you've got to get your cameras in position, then you've got to turn the ship, and then you've got to get the skiffs and coordinate them all to come to a point. So it takes forever, and believe me, it takes weeks and weeks of planning, and then there are a lot of safety issues around working with small skiffs close to a large, speeding container ship. Really a lot of safety issues. That was a lot of my time was taken up with that. And you have to work out all your safe distances, and at what point you would abort and for what reason, and all that stuff. But
again, it's this commitment that you have to verisimilitude and to authenticity.
It's a commitment to keeping safe.
Yeah, but
not
most
killing
people,
anybody.
A lot of directors would have just shot on a green screen on a studio. You didn't want to do that.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have been. The fun was to be out on the ocean and have an adventure, and that was a really big part of it.
And you had your sea legs already, I presume. You were okay
Yeah,
on the water.
all right, but a lot of people weren't. We had a lot of people throwing up. It was definitely a vomit-filled film. That's absolutely true.
Not Tom, presumably, no?
No, he was good.
Okay?
He was good. Though there was one brilliant day when we were shooting in the lifeboat first day, and first the focus puller threw up all over Tom, and then Barry threw up all over the focus puller. And that was absolutely brilliant. That was.
Sets up a human chain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be interesting. Was that on the DVD by any chance? You can see that?
No, but it did make me laugh, I must say. Needless to say, I said keep on shooting.
It's interesting as well watching the defense system that the Maersk Alabama has. I think a lot of people would be surprised by that these massive ships have such a relatively puny defense system. They have to
they don't have any. They don't have any. Nowadays they have security guards on them, but in a way that's part of the. What's interesting is that's all part of the creeping militarization of our world. Our engagement with. The world of the haves engaged with the world of the have-nots at the point of a gun. And this was one of those moments when the ratchet upturned. Suddenly there was no such thing as commercial trade. It all went you know, at the point of a gun.
Absolutely. And we actually have another scene now where it's another attempt to board the ship. And this one actually, we'll see the hoses in action, which is very interesting as well. So let's take a look at this clip. Again, going back to the defense system, they have hoses and a couple of flares. Did that surprise
That's
you?
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
or did you know about that
Well, I
from
mean, no,
your
I mean,
dad's
they're
experiences?
civilian ships,
Yeah.
you know. As I say, one of the things that was interesting about this event is it marked the end of, you know, of 100 years of civilian shipping. It doesn't exist now. It's all carried at the point of a gun, you know. And that sort of tells you something about the world, really. You know.
Absolutely. And that was one of the reasons why you wanted to get involved in it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we saw there that Tom is there as Captain Phillips. I mean, was he on board already whenever?
He was already there. And
Yeah.
that was a big part of it for me. Yeah.
Okay.
And he was fantastic, you know, a brilliant actor, and I think the interesting thing about Tom Hanks is that sort of he plays the ordinary man so well, you know, and that's not easy. You know, we're in a sort of cinematic era, you know, dominated by superheroes basically. But he's always built his career by playing these ordinary men, and that takes real self-discipline because you have to accept these tremendous limitations to what you can do. You don't have extraordinary powers. You're not a soldier with, you know, extraordinary training. You know, you're just an ordinary man with an ordinary range of emotions.
Yeah.
And what he manages to do by sort of accepting those limitations is get deep and find a sort of real reservoir of humanity underneath it. And that, I think, is why he manages to make these sort of ordinary men, you know, like the captain in Saving Private Ryan or this one, I think. You know, he managed to make them so incredibly memorable and immortal, you know.
They're very matter-of-fact performances. There's no histrionics there. There's no look at me
Brilliant.
acting.
No,
What was your first conversation with him like about this movie? You say you'd met him before, you'd spoken to him before, but specifically about this film, what did you talk about?
We sat down and we chatted away, and I sort of gave him my spiel about the film, and it was this, and it was that, and globalization, and he sort of looked a bit, and he said, yeah, I guess so. It's a bit like a guy in peril in the sea, isn't it? Fair enough. But he was right, you know.
Yeah.
But he was a great collaborator and a fantastically hard-working and just a really nice man.
And how did you work with him? Did you change your methods to work with him in any way, or did he change to...
No.
Did you meet each other halfway, or...?
No, in fact, funnily enough, the first 2 days I was a little bit sort of tentative. Just because I sort of thought I'd start in Massachusetts and shoot all that stuff quite steadily.
With Catherine Keener as his wife?
And I had a dolly and track out, even first time in
That's
a
not like you.
decade.
Yeah.
Or if not a lot further. And then after a couple of days I got bored with that, so I chucked it all away. And he came up to me at lunchtime and said, oh, thank God, he said, I thought I wasn't going to get the proper experience of the madness. I said, oh, you wait. We can get very mad now.
What was he expecting, do you know?
Well, just it all to be mad in my usual way, you know. Making stuff up and doing all that, you know.
So is that still roughly what happens on a Paul Greengrass set, that you're rolling with the
Chaos,
punches?
mate.
And,
Absolute chaos.
Yeah. You've done
That's
a movie
what
like
they
this.
all say.
Yeah.
I like chaos. It's good. Chaos is good.
Yeah.
You know, you get boring films if it's like cooking. Do you know what I mean? You can either sort of cook and it's all sort of pre-planned and you end up with airline food in little boxes, you know, or you kind of do a bit of bish bash bosh and it's good.
That's the secret. Bish bash bosh.
There
Nice
you go.
and easy.
That's what I like.
I was lucky enough to be on set of Green Zone, and it's interesting that you...
Oh, that was bish bash bosh. And some. $100 million of bish bash
Precisely.
bosh.
But you did long takes in that one. Were doing 10, 15-minute takes sometimes.
I
Was
like
that
to do
similar
that.
approach in this one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's good because you can get your actors to disappear in the role then, you know. They forget the cameras and you can start to get, you know, something fresh.
And speaking of which, I mean, I love what you did with Tom and Barkat, who plays Muse. I don't know if you can tell that story about, you kept them apart, I believe, before they met on screen for the first time.
Well, we had 4 young... one of the problems of this film was to find 4 Somali actors to play those parts. In fact, all the parts were Somali. A lot of them were from the UK, but the 4 main parts were from from Minneapolis, because that's where the largest Somali community in the US is. And I was actually worried at the outset. I thought, how are we going to be able to find that number of Somali actors? Well, in fact, there are unbelievable numbers of Somali actors in this country and in the US. They just haven't been able to make their way into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And we found these guys, and they were absolutely brilliant, and they really worked hard, and they were just natural storytellers, and fantastic blokes, and well, you can see in the film they're just superb.
Fantastic, yeah.
But I was worried with the first, their first day with Tom, because he's Tom Hanks, so I didn't want them to be inhibited, and I didn't want them to have become his friend for that moment when they come through the door. So I just kept them in separate hotels, and then literally that was the first moment they set eyes on each other, and it sort of worked, because they were ferocious. I mean, they really beat him up good and proper. It was good. It was excellent.
And afterwards, for the second take, how was that?
Oh, well, then it was all, how so you live in Minneapolis, how do you find the snow? So you're Tom Hanks, how do you do that? It was brilliant.
So the open casting calls, so these, how many people turned up roughly in Minneapolis, and where was the other one?
About 800 in Minneapolis,
800? And you were there seeing 800 people, or did
no,
you
we
whittle
were
it
going to
down?
boil them down to 30 that I would meet.
Okay.
And in the end, they were so good, and they put 800 people on tape, or there enough. And but they were so good. I met them in Los Angeles, and you could just tell they were fantastically good, and just really, you can tell with actors very quickly the ones that sort of really have a hunger and a desire, and marry that with innate storytelling ability. I mean, that Barkad Abdi, the main guy, he's absolutely brilliant. I mean, he's brilliant and deft and unusual, and he captures two things. He captures the sort of menace and the brutality and the cynicism of a guy who's going to kidnap you, but he also captures humanity and a much sort of deeper truth about where he comes from. You get a picture of a desperate man with nothing to lose, which is always the most dangerous person to have a gun.
Absolutely. Had you not found 4 Somalian actors, what would you have done?
Been fucked.
Surely out of chaos you can do something with that.
You'd struggle without the actors, let me tell you. That would be difficult.
We'll be talking to someone else now.
No, you would be in real difficulty.
Yeah.
But actually, as soon as you sort of saw the things come, you could just tell there was, just real vibrancy and creativity. They're fantastically. I mean, that was the real privilege of the film, was spending time with all those people, and they were just brilliant fun. And and of course, they were interested in getting a proper picture of these guys, because they understand that world, and of course they're very concerned about, Somalia being stigmatized by piracy and Al-Shabaab, for that matter, which is a different thing. That's terrorism, but it's a failed state. It has all those problems, that was why the film worked, I think, because they were able to bring a humanity to these people, so you understood that they were a response to a society in crisis, not a representation of a whole people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that only Somali actors could have done that.
And the crux of the movie is that relationship, as you said, between the two captains, between Muse and Richard Phillips. Can you talk about that a little bit further? I mean, what about that relationship?
Well, I mean, that's the film. It's the trial of strength between the two of them, and in a way, having a movie star on the one hand and this unknown new actor on the other, the physicality of it and the differing stages of their careers relative to each other created a rub in the casting, which is what you want. You always want your casting to create a dynamic before the film. It's almost at the first sight of them. You create a something that's pushing your story along, and they really did that. But when you watch the film, what's remarkable is that Barkad crafts the throw of his character every bit as accurately as Tom does. It's remarkable, really.
Absolutely. We have one last clip from the film. And then if you have any questions for Paul, you can ask him. So this clip takes place after the Somalian pirates have stormed the ship, boarded the ship. Things have happened, and now they're about to leave the ship. And Richard Phillips is showing them how to use the lifeboat. Take it away. Okay, so any questions now for Paul? Please raise your hands. We've got some roving microphones going around. There's a lady right here in the front row, and then a gentleman here also in the front row. So this lady.
Hi, my name is Mo.
Hi, Mo.
Did you have any problems with the airline? Not the airline, sorry, the Maersk, the container company?
No, they were good, actually, to be fair. We rented one of their ships. I didn't know anything about renting ships, but you can rent them.
Right, it must be quite expensive.
It's quite expensive. Yeah, actually, we didn't have very much money on this film, and that was a real issue. But we rented one of those ships and brought it to Malta, and they were very good. To be fair, what they did was they were sort of very open-handed in the way. I explained what I wanted to do, and I explained that I wanted to sort of make a pretty authentic portrait of these events, and they just they sort of embraced it. They didn't try and put strings attached. They didn't try and have views on the screenplay or interfere in any way. They literally just said anything we can do to help, and there's quite a lot of Maersk shots in it. But there are lots of Maersk containers. That's part of the reality of it. But that sounds a bit trivial. The point is, they weren't to know how this film would turn out, and but that was what was good. They embraced it as a project, and it takes a bit of courage from their point of view, and they did. And the same with the Navy, to be fair. There wasn't this sort of micromanaging thing. They were in for it, and they helped, and then we got on with it, which was good.
Fantastic. There's a gentleman down here. If you got the mic, go.
I'm Amir.
Hello.
So I had a question because when you wanted to cast Tom Hanks, you didn't think that, okay, it's going to be a bit risky because it's been for a decade that his movies were about a bit failure. So, and then his biggest movie, it's back to 2002 in Castaway. So you didn't feel first, okay, maybe I'm gonna risk it. And now when I look at critics, they say that his performance in this movie is one of his greatest performance. So it reminds me a bit like Godfather and the bit with Marlon Brando, why they didn't first.
Well, listen, he's a fantastic actor and one of the great movie stars of all time. I think most actors wouldn't mind having the box office that he's had in the last 10 years, quite apart from before that. And, there's an expression in football, form is temporary, but class is permanent. And Tom Hanks, believe me, is just class all the way. And I think one of the things I think he's been doing in recent years which is why he's remained such a brilliant actor for so many decades, is because he's prepared to tackle very, very different things. Movie like Cloud Atlas, which divided audiences and critics. Some people loved it, some people weren't so keen, but it was a really bold kind of inventive piece. He's done all sorts of different films. He was on Broadway last year, doing a play. So, and what that does is it keeps you fresh so that you're ready for the next piece. So no, he's an absolute Rolls Royce of an actor, believe me.
Are you too close to the film and at this point in time to rank his performance in the pantheon of Tom Hanks performances? Can you?
Impossible. What I do know, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I absolutely think it's one of the great Tom Hanks performances. I do, because it's got such humanity and such variation, and you go through that whole experience with him so powerfully, and the feeling at the end you have is so overwhelming. I think he's brilliant. I think he's just brilliant.
Fantastic. There's a gentleman here, and then we'll go back to you guys.
Hi, Paul. You're right. My name's Bradley.
Yeah. Hello,
I
mate.
just wanted to ask, you was talking about you was researching the Somali pirate side
Yeah.
and that side of the sort of world you're invested in. Did you speak to the crew of the Alabama at all?
I
And
did.
The Tom
I
Hanks
spoke to
character?
every one of them,
How did
yeah.
they? Did they help out the film at all, or?
Well, most of them did. Some of them didn't. There was a lawsuit. Some of them, after it happened, but tried to sue Maersk Corporation, and a few of them in the lawsuit sort of suggested that Phillips had taken the wrong course, and that was an issue for me. I mean, I can't speak to the lawsuit because this doesn't concern me, but that allegation I was very concerned about to know whether it was true or not, and I looked into it, and I was absolutely 100% satisfied that was not true. The route that the Alabama took was the same route that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ships took, but we spoke to a lot of the crew. We had our premiere in New York about 10 days ago, and a lot of them came, and we gave them a big round of applause. It was great. Shane Murphy, the number 2, he was there.
Again, had that lawsuit not worked out the way you were hoping it would work out, would that have been a problem? Could you have not done the movie in that case? Or?
No, I was. I mean, any event, you'll always find issues. There are always different interpretations of it, and part of your job is to assess the material and make judgments about what you think happened. As you would in anything, and you make strong judgments, and then you stand by them. And I was quite satisfied that Phillips was a extremely competent, professional, experienced merchant mariner whose concern had been the safety of his crew and the safety of his ship, following a route that every other ship was following. The point was, nobody had ever attacked a ship with that high, a shipboard. It was that high out of the water. That was absolutely unprecedented. And a ship with such speed and size, it was the first time that had ever happened. And that was really what undid them. Their presumption was that they would be okay, but they were not.
Absolutely. There was a gentleman over here, and then we'll go to you at the back. Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, do you make a conscious choice to base your films on true life stories rather than fictional pieces?
Not. I mean, I've done both. I mean, I did the Bourne movies. They're sort of, and Green Zone. They were sort of fictional stories, But certainly the 2 Bourne movies were sort of popcorn movies. They were big Saturday night franchise movies. I like all the films that I make to feel grounded and have a bit of balls, if you like. But then I also do, stories that are based on reality too. But I try to mix and match them. Not do too many of one in a row and then do something else.
Okay, there's a gentleman here right at the back. Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
I was going to ask, not about Captain Phillips, but would you ever consider coming back to do another Bourne film? What did you think of the Bourne legacy?
Listen, I loved making the Bourne movies that I made. I had a great time. They were incredibly hard work, but they were a blast. They were good fun, and I'm very proud of them. But you got to know when to stop with those things. It's too easy for me. I just didn't want to come back and do one that my heart wasn't in. And so when they asked me to come back, I sort of thought about it for a while, and I was tempted, but when I really looked into my heart, I was really only tempted by the sentimentality of staying in something that I'd had a lot of fun with. And what actually happened was that I initially said I would. That's actually what happened. Have I told you this story?
Yeah,
I told them I would.
Yeah.
And then I woke up the next day and I knew that I'd made the wrong decision. Sometimes when you're really conflicted about something, you only know when you choose. You know what I mean? And either you've made the right choice or you know immediately that you've made the wrong. I just knew immediately that it was the wrong choice. And then I phoned them up and they were very, very nice about it. And I just said, listen, my heart's not in it and it never will be. I'm done with it. I've done with that. I love it, but I want to move on and I want to do some other films. and they were lovely. And then they got, they had to carry on, and they did Bourne Legacy, which I wish them well with it. It's, I hope they make more, and I hope they're good.
You said in the past that if you could find the right story, that you and Matt might do a Bourne 4. So whenever you said yes, that initial point when you said yes, was there a story in place? Did you have a rough idea, an outline maybe? Nothing?
I had some ideas as to how I would do it, but it never really, loose ideas. It was never going to work. It was, the point about those franchises, they're worth so much money. They're such colossal pieces of investment by the studio that they have to keep them going. I mean, I understand that, and you have to understand that you serve those franchises. They're not yours, and then you have to hand them over to somebody else to have a go and do their version of what I did. And if you hang around, you're just, number one, it's not good for you, because what are you doing? You're no longer really a filmmaker. You're just churning them out for the, because maybe you don't have the balls to do other things, or maybe you've forgotten how, or whatever. But I had a deep desire to do other things, and not be defined by them.
Absolutely.
But I'm proud of them,
There's a gentleman over here, thank you, and then we'll go over here.
Hi, I just want to ask you, what's your take on, Somali people thinking, you just portraying piracy, but the real issue is, those pirates used to be fishermen that used to protect the, sea. There's majority of Somali thinking, okay, they just, these films only concentrate on the captain rather than the pirate's background.
But have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't seen it, but there's a few clips. So, but I'm just saying, there's a few Somalis thinking, okay, there's only concentrating the story of.
Listen, I understand, and if I was Somali, I'd think like that. What I would say is go and see the film, and then let me know if you still feel that, because I don't believe that you would feel like that. Are you seeing the film?
I've seen them, yeah.
I think on the contrary, I would say across the board now. It's difficult for me to speak for my film because I made it. You know what I mean? But I think it would be fair to say, and Chris would be a better person to talk about this than me. I think the most noticeable thing about what people have said in reaction to this film, critically and audiences too, in America, what surprised them is that it's just as much about the young pirate as it is about the captain, and it's the humanity and the sort of the strength of the characterization of the Somali guy. And why? Because we had 50-odd Somali actors who were making sure that story got told, and that was why we made it in that way, So what I would say is I totally understand. There's no doubt that Somalis, and I understand and respect it, they feel stigmatized by the problems that afflict Somalia. The answer to that is you can't ignore the problems that affect Somalia. I think most Somalis agree with that. But what they ask for is a view of those problems, in this case piracy, that's authentic and true, and understanding of the great forces in Somalia to do with, collapse of central government, overfishing in their waters, fishing communities being destroyed by toxic waste dumping, all those issues that gave rise to it, warlord activity. And I think you'll find in our film that all of that is really, really reflected, because those people who took part in our film ensured it was there. That answer your question?
Cool. Thank you. We've got time for one last question over here in the front row. Thank you.
I have a question about United 93.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say it was a really amazing film. But
thanks.
it was about the portrayal of...
there you go. Sorry, I can't see it.
It was about the portrayal of Christian Adams. There was a bit of controversy around that, considering that he was the European passenger on the plane. And there wasn't really any evidence supporting that he was acting cowardly, as some have suggested. And I was just wondering, like, how did it come about that he was portrayed like that?
Well, first of all, I don't agree, and I think you'd be hard pushed. I think if you put that audience up in front of 1,000 people, I don't think you'd find many, if any, who would say that he was portrayed as a coward. I don't believe that to be true. So that's my first. I will answer your question, but I'm just contesting. I don't think that was that portrayal at all. Second point is there wasn't any controversy. What there was one article in The Guardian. Fair enough. Guy's entitled to his opinion. But in an ocean of articles about that film that appreciated what it was trying to do, one comment was made, but that doesn't make controversy. Do you know what I mean? That makes one guy had an opinion, which is fine. He's entitled to his opinion. But let's not pluralise it. It was one guy. Okay. That film was made for a particular reason, okay? 9/11, I think we'd all agree, was a fantastically important event in our world because number one, because it happened and what it was. But number two, much more importantly, I think, because of the way it absolutely transformed politics in our world. You know, it drove our world with fear and a desire for revenge and paranoia and, you know, all that's followed from there. This you know, the maelstrom of the way our world has gone. Okay. I'm going to answer this at length because I think it's really important, and I respect your question, but I'm just doing, you know, I really want to get to the issues here. Okay. 9/11, from my point of view as a filmmaker, it was the most important event. So I wanted to make a film about it, okay? What was interesting to me and what concerned me was that 9/11 almost immediately was given a whole series of meanings, principally by politicians. And most importantly, in the events on that aeroplane, if you remember, within a day or two, it became let's roll. Let's roll meant let's get them. You know, that's what President Bush said. Let's get them, let's roll. And it became a rallying cry for a certain sort of politics and a certain political response, right? And all sorts of meanings were given to 9/11. So what I said was, I want to make a film that explores as best I can what the meanings of those events actually are if you remove your preconceptions and you just looked at the event for what it actually was, okay? And I felt that the epicenter of the event was that particular aeroplane. And the reason for that was very clear to me. The point was, I remember very clearly 9/11. I was cutting a film in Soho when it happened. And I remember that sort of period of several hours, and it was several hours, when you knew that something unbelievable had happened, but you knew it must be kind of some form of political violence, but you didn't really know. People didn't know what Al-Qaeda was in those days, you know. If you'd have asked a straw poll of people, nobody would have known, you know. The point was, when we were all reeling around going, what is this and what does it mean and what do we do and how do we respond and how do we process that, there were 40 people on an aeroplane faced with it. And they were the first people to enter the post 9/11 world, the world that we've now inhabited for 12 years, okay? And they had to process who these people were, what they were trying to do, and what could happen. And it became a little prism, and these four men who'd taken the plane were equally in that world. And that was a sort of prism in which you could see where we were going to go, right? And it ended up with a desperate struggle for the controls of an aeroplane, and that high-tech aeroplane, to my mind, was our world, you know? So that was the film I wanted to make. What I wanted to do was to explore as clearly as I could what that experience must have been like to see what it made you feel, and what meanings you would draw from it if you were acted without prejudice. The tools for doing that are the tools of drama. That's called actors. Not writers who've decided what it is, but actors, because I believe, for better or worse, I really do believe, that acting, the art of acting, the power of acting, is a tool to unlock truths. It's not the same as journalistic truth, it's not the same as historical truth, but actors can tell you things that you couldn't know if they hadn't acted. They can get into spaces and tell you not what happened as a sort of matter of fact, but when you put it all together, it has a truth, and you go, it must have been something like that, right? I believe that. It's like it's just you either believe that that is possible or you don't. I believe it is, right? So believing that, we set up a creative process. And the rules were that we would start with all the known facts, okay, that we could know. And you could actually know a lot about that aeroplane flight. You could know it from all the other flights. And if you look at the various 9/11 commissions, you know, it's all there. You could know a lot about it. We cast real aircrew, real pilots, and they told you a lot, and we shot it in a real aeroplane. When you get in there, you can work out a lot of things from using those people and 40 actors to know what must have been happened. I'll give you for instance for that. Up until we made that film, the idea was that those passengers had pushed a dining cart down the centre of the aeroplane and sort of smashed it into the... Well, you've only got to get onto a real aeroplane with a real dining cart. You realise that can't possibly have happened because you can't push those things down the aisle because they, you know... And also, if you're sitting at one aeroplane and your job is to get to 4 people who you think are going to, crash the plane, you're going to run fast. You're not going to go behind a dolly cart like this. So I can't prove to you that's the case, but it was absolutely without a doubt it must have been like that. Okay, that's an example of one small error. But what you're trying to do is use that company of actors in a real space with some professionals to unlock what it must have been like. If you close your eyes and look at it, it must have been a bit like that. Okay? Then we went to every single family on that aeroplane and asked for their permission to make the film, including the family of that particular gentleman, right? Every single one of them agreed. They all came from different parts of the world, different parts of America, different political opinions, quite radically divergent ones, and we spent a lot of time going and explaining what we wanted to do and asking their permission, and they all agreed, okay? When we got in the plane, and you've watched the film, right? Yeah. It became very clear to us that the central issue was, and if you think about it on a human level, you're in an aeroplane. It's been hijacked. You do not know what happened on 9/11. That's not known to you. All you're aware of is that 4 men who seem to be carrying bombs have hijacked your aeroplane. Okay? The overwhelming human desire is to believe that this plane is going to be landed and there's going to be a negotiation and you're going to get free, because that's what you want to have happen, okay? And that is how, up to that point in history, most, if not all, hijacks have ended up in some version. There may be a shootout on the ground, but essentially the plane... Nobody had ever witnessed people hijacking planes and crashing them into buildings. Okay, that was beyond our awareness. We know it now, but they didn't know it then, right? So what was very clear, and now I'm talking about actor's instinct, every actor in that aeroplane was saying, I feel, that's an actor's instinct, I feel that I would be thinking, somebody's going to land this plane, it's going to be all right, pray God it's going to be all right, okay? The German actor, because the rules of the piece were that each actor had to find their own destiny in the piece. That was the rule, and we, out of that collective exploration would come some dramatic truth, and I believed it would shed light on what happened. Okay, I can't tell you it was exactly it, but I believed it would tell you some truths about it. That young German actor, who was a very thoughtful, intelligent man, he said that as a German citizen, the last hijack in Germany had landed successfully and everybody had got off. And he said that was a very well-known fact in Germany. And he said that would be absolutely in the forefront of my mind. I would be not wanting people to attack the plane for fear that it would cause an accident. I would be the voice. I would be at the forefront of the voices saying, we must give this time, we must let them land. And it wasn't about cowardice, it was about he was acting on the knowledge that he had, okay? And I don't believe it was cowardice. It was part of the debate in the plane. We know from those phone calls that they had a debate about what to do, that there were different opinions, and that's what we reflected. Now, can I say that conversation happened exactly like that? No. But do I believe in that aeroplane that there must have been voices of people saying, and I would definitely have been one, by the way, I would have been saying, for fuck's sake, don't do anything. They're going to land this thing. Don't do it. We mustn't do anything that can cause a problem, right? But we know that there were other voices, for sure, and in the end it became the settled will of those group of people, that they'd entered this new world where it was clear what they were going to do, and therefore they ran, up the aisle and everything that happened. So I believe in the legitimacy of that picture. I think it did not. I profoundly disagreed with that Guardian writer. I thought, okay, he's entitled to his opinion, but I really disagree, and I think it was a cheap shot at a serious piece of acting. But, he's entitled to his view. Lastly, all of those families saw that film. And that was the sort of important to the process that I show them the film, and they all, I would say they all are very proud of that. That was certainly the impression they gave to me, and to this day remain proud. Why? Because at the end of the day, although they all died, that plane did not reach its target, and whatever you say about those events, if any of us there were on that plane, what would we have done? I mean, pray God that we weren't. And that was the story that was told in that. So do I think it was a journalistic truth? Do I think it's a verifiable truth? No. But do I think that when you watch that film, you have an overwhelming sense of a group of actors showing you really profound truths about what that experience was and what it meant? And what it meant was not what politicians said it meant. What it meant was humanity in extremis. That's what you felt at the end of that film, a sense of humanity in this terrible, dark place struggling for the controls of the world. Do I think it spoke to that? I think it did, and I stand by every frame of that film. Does that answer your question? But thanks for asking it, because I've wanted to give that explanation. I got asked that the other day, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
But it was some wanker at the BBC, and you had 30 seconds to reply. And they did the same thing. There's been a lot of criticism of your film. And you go, no, there was one criticism about 10 years ago.
Okay, I'm sure we'd love to have more questions, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you to Paul Greengrass.